Hey, this is Alex Head, founder of Subtext Radio.
This is Subtext.
Please go ahead and click the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps us to reach new audiences and promote the artists that we work with. Hit like and hit subscribe.
This is Subtext.
This is Anna Kostreva presenting on Subtext Radio for the ADATA AiR series from Plovdiv, Bulgaria. From my temporary living room to your computer, from my breath to your ear, and from my thoughts to your neural process. Knowledge production in an American accent.
And right here we have these sort of fake plastic flowers in the cemetery. And I think that they're disturbing because of their claim to be real.
The claim to also have someone taking care. I think that if you see flowers on a grave, it means that actually someone is coming there and taking care of that grave. And so if you come and take a look at a grave and you think, oh, someone is caring for this place, and then you realize that all of a sudden those flowers are fake, then it feels like somehow something has been withdrawn.
Yeah. Yeah. Their plasticity claims to be more than real, but what they represent is a sanitized version of reality that doesn't match up to the humanity of something like death.
Hi, Albert. This is Saturday, April the 13th, 1968. I'd like to tell you what I have done today and get this tape going so we could get it mailed to you tomorrow. Number one is that...
Where are you speaking from?
Well, it's always a disembodied voice, right? The one in the radio. And yet it's attached to a lot of stereotypes of what a voice is. So I have an American accent, and I have a female or almost a girl-like sound. So those are characteristics that people attach certain meaning to that in some ways I'm hoping to break through. A good part of it is not having the authority to speak over things through a perception of youth, and also through the perception of American naivety, American ignorance, the idea that Americans generally are there to have fun and not to take things seriously.
You're coming from a background in architecture as well. You must find that also to be a very male-dominated environment.
Oh, definitely.
Isn't
almost any field male-dominated? I think the only field for me that I have some footing or, let's say, interest in that I've explored in my career has been choreography, dance, and performance art. I think those are places where women have managed to really find a spatial practice that is its own discipline and has its own vibrancy. And in fields of architecture, art, criticism, theory, literature, media, all of the sort of hegemonic spaces of dispersal of information and large-scale interest, you have a patriarchy that has to be constantly negotiated as a female practitioner.
According to Wikipedia, when I looked it up this morning, it said that there have been people who have lived here since 4000 BC.
the favorite camera angle of the great classic cinema, according to the codes fixed by Hollywood, is a slight high angle, which sets off the figures and allows for sky effects. In Tarkovsky's films, it's generally the opposite. The camera is slightly above the figures, who are rooted in the landscape. The naive American contemplates the sky. The Russian, at least that Russian, settles in the sky and contemplates the earth.
Adata Island was quite different because, as many people have explained, you kind of get off a bus stop near a McDonald's and a big supermarket, and then you walk for about 5 minutes along a motorway, and the motorway goes over the river, and then there's a set of steps down below the motorway onto the island. In terms of saying that the island is larger than I expected, maybe another key thing was I expected to be able to see the parameters of the island, and in reality I could only see half of it, the half of it on the left-hand side of the motorway as you step onto it. So in some ways it didn't really, when you first arrive, it doesn't look like an island, it just looks like the other side of the riverbank.
Strangely for me, the moment of entering Adata actually starts with actually walking onto the motorway. That is the threshold, or the entrance situation is a built one, and it is the pier crossing the island. And so leaving the city happens for me actually more like at the McDonald's and at the supermarket and the bus stop, and entering this infrastructural space.
I think that's spot on, and I think my feeling about the island would be that it is a hybrid space between the motorway and the actual Adata Island. In terms of the spatial construct of what it is, it's more of a hybrid between the two. And I think that's why I start to realise that the industrial village with the supermarket, the McDonald's and the other shops on it is also an island in that.
It's just locale. Actually just an expansion of the same hybrid infrastructure. It's funny, I can feel my voice being a sort of reporter voice, telling the world a bit like, this is what it looks like, these are the facts. I think when I'm writing to myself, it's much more personal, because there's less to conform to. At least the voice is not conforming to these ideas about how to report or how to speak clearly and factually somehow. When I'm writing, I give myself a bit more artistic freedom to just move things around, or maybe it's also because it's much more alone. You know, here you are holding the mic for me, whereas if I was walking around by myself with the mic, maybe I would be able to come to that point gradually of the artistic freedom with the way that I would talk about the things around me.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way, that you can do that sometimes, or?
I feel that definitely. On the microphone, you don't have really the editing capacity until later, and in a way, because you have so much freedom, you have to make decisions more quickly about what tonality am I employing, what type of knowledge is being produced here. Is it journalistic? Is it creative interpretive? Is it just a diary? And for whom am I speaking? And those questions run throughout all of the kind of radio process. In the end, I think it does kind of make you be more succinct.
You know, I don't know yet why I want to tell people about what's happening on either side of these bridges. Or if I'm telling one person in particular, or if I'm telling myself what's happening on the bridges, or on the bridge and on the other sides of the bridge.
I think it's kind of fun as well, though, not to know. It's just sticking with the feeling. Maybe the advantage of the radio reportage sort of instant observation is that you're immediately connected to the place where you're observing. Even though that can be distracting as well, it's a direct line.
Simultaneously passed by two interesting characters on the bridge. One was an older man on a bike with wood stacked up on the back who growled at us for taking up too much space. And the other was a horse and cart on the road with a red yarn hat on the horse, kind of flopping around as it went. The Balkan Mountains are hardly visible from the other side of the bridge compared to the rhodope ones on the first side of the bridge, or even from here. They're very tall and present for Plovdiv compared to the Balkans, which maybe are faintly visible as a line behind the clouds and the tower blocks to the north.
Knowledge production in an American accent.
Gaze is so fixed straight ahead, and they are definitely sort of a diagram for a social logic.
Mm-hmm.
You know? The man is very overpowering and strong, physically strong, but the mother also is. And she's carrying a baby, and she has an infant standing next to her who is beginning to become robust.
The worker baby.
Yeah, there's this idea of like progress and commitment and lack of doubt, but that had graffitied on the side of it, letters all over the side of it. So they probably will maybe maintain those objects more in the future, but it's definitely not the priority
right now
for funding. Or
mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't expect that actually you'd even have so many impressions of Plovdiv because of being here for such a short period of time.
Yeah.
But it's kind of amazing to pass those impressions, I think, in the residency that Alex has set up from like one artist to another, because I get to see a little bit how you've experienced the city so far. And I guess what I wanted to get to was what your experience of entering this island that was sort of the catalyst for coming here in the first place, not necessarily Plovdiv, even though Plovdiv is hosting the European capital of culture. In some ways we are all drawn here for some sort of unknown other space that is has some sort of threat to it, or even imagination about what could happen to or be consumed by the city, or is it within the city? It's sort of it lies in a more questionable terrain, but also within a lot of tropes, which is why I was bringing up the Eastern Europe, Western Europe divide. I mean, if we have like a nature culture divide, do we actually want to see that when we enter this space, or do we start building up other ways of describing the city and the island, or the city and the river? And so I wanted to get you to describe just going to this place from sort of this, also these descriptions that you, maybe the images that you started building up of what Plovdiv is, to then this other space. So we just walked through a flock of black crows and their babies. But did you know that black crows can recognize human faces and communicate them? So I have a feeling that they're also talking about us. And they can also communicate a human face over generations, so that later on, a bird that's never seen a human can still recognize that human. It's, that's the capability we even don't have about each other.
Kind of hard to explain. Why, you want to hear something?
What I'm trying to drive at is a bit more the experience of space. What I'd like to get out of you also in your practice and your experience of coming to Plovdiv or to Eastern Europe, if there's also like a spatial situation. And it's also, just a trope, right? And we're sitting and reflecting on it as people that will not spend really significant periods of time here, besides to work with some sort of imaginary that we have built up, and then to try to see if we can actually work around those stereotypes or work with them.
I really don't know if I came with that many spatial preconceptions. I really don't think I did. I mean, possibly if I really push myself, then I have a preconception about large-scale communist architecture. So I was expecting to see tower blocks and abandoned industrial buildings. I was expecting that, but I wasn't expecting to see so many abandoned buildings. I think I was surprised by the number of buildings that I saw that were say burnt out or had a sense that they were intentionally neglected. And I suppose that's possibly partly because the Soviet-era architecture is probably quite loaded.
And that people don't want to use those symbols for their lives now, you think?
I think it's also like a notion of progress, like it's a natural thing. A lot of people are looking to join the Western European idiom, probably, or at least access that finance and status associated with that, and stability. And those buildings represent a different kind of stability, one that doesn't prioritize individualism in the same way.
Hi. I'm just recording the sound of you working.
Hadi gizli mi?
It's just the sound of
Germanic?
Deutsch.
Deutsch,
Ja, kann ich ein bisschen Deutsch, ja.
Да, наш язык договорит.
No, I didn't speak any, I didn't know anything.
Не могу договорить.
Yeah.
Может, само да снимаш, ама да говори не може.
Guten Tag, hallo.
Mümkin.
Ich mache eine Aufnehmung für eine Radiosendung.
Radio.
Wie heißt du? Ja. Viele Arbeit, ne?
Arbeit.
Ja. I'd like to thank How you doing? Alex. Do you speak English or German? Deutsch? Bulgar kann ich nicht. No.
What's your name?
Alex.
My name? Ivan.
Ivan. Nice to meet you, Ivan. Yes, it's recording, yeah.
My name Dancho.
Dancho, okay, Alex. Nice to meet you, man. Peace. And this is your cat?
Yeah.
Polka?
Kotka.
Okay, nice. Животно.
Каза, че нямаше търся, ама не знам къде.
No pictures, but recordings, yeah. Genau. Yeah, it's better for me.
Anglican?
I'm English, yeah. I'm English.
America?
No, English. British.
Англия.
Yeah.
Микрофон?
Микрофона, ама не сега говори, той не чува така.
Да.
You can speak on. Yeah, it gets everything. So like the music, this guy, us speaking, the cat, it all goes on.
Meow!
Yeah. Cheers.
Той каза.
I'm going this way. Ciao.
Goodbye.
Ciao, goodbye. Have a nice day.
За първи път гледам.
Yeah. This one works, right? Yeah.
Ciao.
Cheers, ciao. Yeah, really nice couple of guys. I don't know if they're a father and son, but the younger one, he had a cat, and he had a little English, and the older man was kind of indicating many times that kind of it wasn't a thing to be taking pictures, but that making a recording was kind of alright, and that was sort of on. I'll have to get someone to translate the recording to actually confirm that, but if that was the case, then yeah, that makes sense to me. So yeah, just I'm going to walk back into taxi range, hopefully, and go back into town, but already it feels like there's a lot more here. There's a fucking horse galloping at me.
I work from an embedded, perhaps complicit condition as a trained architect. Looking at global problems today, we could blame much on consumption, particularly the consumption of space through privatization of the built environment. Problems produced range from social inequality to environmental disaster. Architects are often trained to participate in this problem rather than to resist it, but I'd like to explore the possibility of resistance here. As Plovdiv stretches, fluxes, and dreams of development of the built environment, Western ideals of normalcy, growth, and prosperity, what can a critical approach to the capitalist, speculative schema provide for a city with optimism for change? How can I imagine sustaining a practice in critique of, or outside of, capitalism? In the 70s, artists stated their rejection of capitalism through happenings. These were events where the audience often participated in art making and it often went totally undocumented. It was a format that could not be appropriated by galleries or sold to individuals. For me, in collaborating with the artistic practices of wasteland twinning and subtext radio, I have been exposed to other tools of resistance. Wasteland Twinning Network resists the enclosure of urban wastelands by researching and participating in the inhabitation and activation of spaces temporarily outside of the urban cycle of privatization. Subtext radio also acts as a rejection to visual currencies. Using radio, in particular to deal with the questions of place, manages to create an experience and affect without spectacle or driving consumption. A sound piece about a place does not produce the postcard image for tourists to collect. It takes longer and requires co-production by the listener. Imagination and appropriation create places in their own right, somewhat detached from the physical. Resisting visual consumption in architecture is problematic but necessary when thinking of global development. Politics often sidesteps its claim to providing governance for its citizens by instead keeping up the image of the world-class city, attempting to provide clean streets, brand-name shops, and Starchitect design museums, as if these would automatically produce a successful economy, rather than investing in the citizens through education and local business, or even maintaining infrastructures and the ecologies that the urban always depends on. So politics goes after the spectacle, the image, of smooth, object-based production. Governance has become the amelioration of the overall privatization of the city through the reproduction of a status quo, often land grabbing from citizens to hand over large chunks of real estate to foreign investors. And architects have, for the most part, simply delivered the smooth and shiny objects. But I think architects can offer more. Their tools can answer both the physical and metaphysical needs of inhabitation. Given the right circumstances, architectural and spatial practice can offer answers to cultural production and knowledge production. To do this, I think maybe the biggest shift for architecture is to conceptualize a non-commercial practice. This could somehow mean removing the production of the object and also money from the client. What is left of architecture after that? What does it look like? How does an architect figure out who they're working for then, or what to produce? Architecture qua architecture, or buildings as we know them, may still exist under a non-commercial practice. I have worked most often in the production of cultural buildings like theaters, museums, or artist residencies. And cultural buildings like educational buildings or social housing are generally built for a greater good than speculation and personal gain. And perhaps it is also possible to build robust buildings that add to a city's built environment positively, and to make buildings that outlast speculation, so that they can be used after their initial investment money has returned, rather than being torn down for the next profit-seeking real estate run. The world already has a lot of buildings, and these examples, like almost any new building within the built environment, are a conservative reproduction of white capitalist patriarchal hegemony. A state-sponsored theater or social housing block may sidestep the direct client relationship, but the building is still an object that can be bought and sold by those within existing power structures. I think architecture can also be thought differently. This is where I also argue for an expanded practice. Architecture can be an assemblage of material, people, and events, rather than an aesthetic but empty built container. In this vein, it is possible to conceptualize building differently. It can also be maintaining, dismantling, or even activating practice. It can be something else than putting up a wall, a division, a border, cutting one space off from another. It can be expansion, acknowledging space, interpretation, and revisioning. We could think of this work as architectural poiesis, the activity in which a person brings something into being that did not exist before. It is making, but it works poetically, often immaterially. It cleans, it crops, it creates clarity. It is subtle and elegant, but not negotiable. It can be done with words, through the description of a place, through radio or a text. It can be done with embodied practice, through an event or a collective walk, and more and more. But this is not enough to define a non-commercial practice, or one which resists capitalist modes of production. What I have described so far is simply and implicitly outside of capitalism, but it is without any struggle or confrontation. I think this confrontation can happen when we use architectural poiesis to argue for the creation of community assets. For instance, writing, tours, or exhibitions could make people aware of spaces with potential for collective belonging, or to value and prioritize spaces of collective belonging over commercial potential. We have to resist profit as the best motive for planning cities and spaces. Architects should also resist taking projects that are driven by profit rather than common good. If the architect can expand their practice outside of building and into observation, new things could happen. The evaluation of existing material, its interpretation and revisioning can create the impetus to accomplish public ownership. Moving spaces that are currently thought of as valuable only when they change private hands into an invaluable space that can no longer be bought and sold. From real estate to potential commons. So, it's all a bit ironic to be talking about critical practice in a country that was formerly socialist. In Germany, critical practice generally criticizes the capitalist mode of production. But what is it like here in Bulgaria? Has Plovdiv managed to turn capitalism into positive development for the city? Is there Western optimism in its gears? This week, I watched the documentary, In the Ghetto, The Roma of Stolipinovo, from Studio West, filmed in 2009, and much critique was placed on the change to democracy. During communism, the Roma and the other immigrant communities living in Stolipinovo were oppressed to live as Bulgarians, to call themselves by Bulgarian names, to speak Bulgarian, and censored from their culture and their music. But they had work, and they lived normal lives. They lived like everyone else. Then, when democracy came, freedom came. Freedom to get satellite TV, play their music, celebrate their festivities. But, for the people of Stolipinovo, this freedom also meant that private Bulgarian companies could discriminate against hiring them for work. And so the people that live there are practically completely unemployed. The documentary by Andreas Kuntz portrayed this discrimination as extending from lack of property ownership to failing school systems to prejudice on the bus. Since I do not know Plovdiv so well, I am taking this documentary at face value, and I will use it to continue my thoughts. What is freedom for the people of Stolipinovo when basic needs can't be met? Does the freedom of democracy engender social inequity, or is it the neoliberal capitalism that we live in? Could Stolipinovo function as a community asset, a commons, with the right interpretation and revisioning? I respect the communities that have built themselves up in Stolipinovo. They sustain each other. And in a way, Stolipinovo exists outside of neoliberal capitalism with its informal built environment. So I suppose it has advantages because of that. For instance, it cannot be bought and sold the way other plots in the city can be bought and sold. But it is a difficult knot, because this precarious labor force on the periphery of the city is a product of opportunistic, profit-driven economic reproduction. Governments around the world turn a blind eye to unfair wages and terrible living conditions to keep business as usual running. And despite the communities that glue themselves together within this condition, they cannot function as a commons or as an asset. For me, it simply cannot function as a community asset to have a ghetto, to have a place of poverty segregated off from the rest of the city. Of course, there is a problem of wage disparity across the world, but the spatial problem is when one group of people or one type of program gets too big and homogeneous that it doesn't allow for other groups to exist. This can happen from the side of the ghetto, and it can also happen from the side of gentrification. I believe in diversity and heterogeneity as a key element to vibrant urban life. People need to live next to one another, share public spaces, and shop in the same places to gain understanding of one another. Otherwise, the oppression and the discrimination just continue. So, the architectural assemblage, the combination of built material, people, and events, must be thought of at another scale than, for example, the neighborhood of Stolipinovo. The architectural poiesis, to interpret and revision a place like Stolipinovo, must be done at the scale of the city. Perhaps this is one where horse-drawn carts make their way down certain streets, and where busking is allowed on certain corners, one where loud festivities are held on certain days, one where Bulgarian schoolchildren play on the Maritsa banks with the Roma, and one where workplaces become inserted into the dense fabric of Stolipinovo without rental contracts. It is the logic of capitalism and the aesthetic of global cities that tells us that street sellers are worse than advertisements, and that festival music on the corner is worse than construction noise. We allow the advertisements and the construction noise, but we cannot get past cultural differences because we fail to understand value. The architectural poiesis might only be able to happen when we see the events, the people, and then the built material together as a community asset to resist capitalism as we know it.
This is Subtext on 199 Radio.
Hello. Message received. Message sent. Voice print accepted. Welcome back.
And we think that this alignment is necessary for communication. For example, as you can tell, I'm not a native English speaker, and I grew up in another language. And the same might be for many of you in the audience. And still, we can communicate. How come? And we think that we can communicate because we have this shared common code that represents meaning. So far, I only talked about happening in the listener's brain, in your brain, when you're listening to talks. But happening in the speaker's brain, in my brain, when I'm speaking to you. To look on the speaker brain, we ask the speaker to go into the scanner, we scan his brains, and then compare his brain responses to the brain responses of the listeners listening to the story. And you have to remember that producing speech and comprehending speech are very different processes. And here we're asking how similar are they? And to our surprise, we saw that all these complex patterns within the listeners actually came from the speaker brain. So production and comprehension rely on very similar processes. And we also found the stronger the similarity between the listener's brain and the speaker brain, the better the communication. So I know that if you are completely confused now, and I do hope that this is not the case, your brain responses is very different than mine. But I also know that if you really understand me now, then your brain and your brain and your brain are really similar to mine.
Of a more rural construction type, so terracotta tiles that have obviously been repaired using like cement. Mm-hmm. So rather than nail and wedge, like being used, cement has been used to kind of refix the tiles to stop the roof from leaking. Mm-hmm. And for example, like with a few of the roofs that have been fixed in that way, you could see that the people doing the maintenance had climbed onto the roof with buckets probably of wet cement to do mm-hmm. that, because there were blobs of cement at various points, like a sort of set of footprints explaining the way the work had been done.
Knowledge production in an American accent.
Some of these graves have cacti covered. They're covered in cacti, which is also pretty uncanny because it's so dry and spiky. And some of them are like marble slabs with just like a corner or a piece of it revealed so that flowers can grow from just a section.
A lot of them with Soviet stars, of course, and a lot of Orthodox. This is an Orthodox cemetery, but there's also a Jewish quarter that we just walked past.
And a lot of photographs sort of on the gravestones themselves, which is, I have not seen in any other graveyard to this extent. It seems like almost every other grave here has a photograph, black and white photograph, portrait.
The Helix Lucurium linearis.
That one was found in 1758.
I think they look so old.
So we're walking through a path in between the rowing canal and the Maritza, and noticing a bit the flora here. It seems like a lot of it is similar to what you find on the Adata Island. The larger trees and bushes are sort of fern-like leaf structures. The one thing that seems not similar is the vine-like plants that are cropping up on this riverbank here. And perhaps that those vines, were they to find their way onto the Adata, would really change the overall biodiversity there. There's also a lot more wheat-like grass here, I would say. And it seems overall a bit more homogeneous, perhaps, than the sort of sectioned off interaction that one has on the Adata, in which sort of groupings of certain types of plants seem to come and swell up.
A concrete pier connecting the city to a cemetery. A line that flies through the tree canopy of a river island. A memorial at the center reveals itself as a stairway, acting as a secret doorway to the otherwise inaccessible forest.
It's not the best fucking background for recording, you can imagine. Much better to be up there in the glorious Rhodop Mountains.
But we didn't plan that this time.
Which we've never been to.
I was thinking when I was doing this research about the Maritza that we need to go to the source of the Maritza in the mountains, and that's really what the nice thing to do with our time would be, and not be wandering around this urban environment.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want to do that.
No, that's not our program.
Text. Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, 1929.
Capitalism at present, I would say, produces all positions, even the opposition to itself.
But, you may say, we asked you to speak about women in fiction. What has that got to do with a room of one's own? I will try to explain. When you asked me to speak about women in fiction, I sat down on the banks of a river and began to wonder what the words meant. They might mean simply a few remarks about Fanny Burney, a few more about Jane Austen, a tribute to the Brontes, and a sketch of Haworth Parsonage under snow. Some witticisms, if possible, about Miss Mitford, a respectful allusion to George Eliot, a reference to Miss Gaskell, and one would have done. But at second sight the words seem not so simple. The title Woman and Fiction might mean, as you may have meant it to mean, women and what they are like. Or it might mean women and the fiction that they write, or it might mean women and the fiction that is written about them. Or it might mean that somehow all three are inextricably mixed together, and you want me to consider them in that light. But when I began to consider the subject in this way, which seemed most interesting, I soon saw that it had one fatal drawback. I should never be able to come to a conclusion. I should never be able to fulfill what is, I understand, the first duty of a lecturer, to hand you, after an hour's discourse, a nugget of pure truth, wrapped up between the pages of your notebooks and kept on the mantelpiece forever.
Capitalism at present, I would say, produces all positions, even the opposition to itself. How capitalism would exist without this opposition to itself? Because it needs this task of transcending, it needs the struggle. It feeds it.
To offer you an opinion upon a minor point. A woman must have money
and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And that, as you will see, leaves the great problem of the true nature of woman and the true nature of fiction unsolved. Here then was I, sitting on the banks of a river a week or two ago in fine October weather, lost in thought. To the right and left, bushes of some sort, golden and crimson, glowed with the colour, even it seemed burnt with the heat of fire. On the further bank, the willows swept in perpetual lamentation, their hair about their shoulders. The river reflected whatever it chose of sky and bridge and burning tree. And when the undergraduate had oared his boat through the reflections, they closed again, completely, as if he had never been. There one might have sat the clock round, lost in thought. Here then, Mary Breton ceases to speak. The prosaic conclusion, that it is necessary to have 500 a year and a room with a lock on it, if you are to write fiction or poetry. She has tried to lay bare the thoughts and impressions that led her to think this. While she has been doing all these things, you no doubt have been observing her failings and foibles and deciding what effect they have had on her opinions. You have been contradicting her and making whatever additions and deductions seem good to you. That is all as it should be. For in a question like this, truth is only to be had by laying together many varieties of error. As people mature, they cease to believe in sides, or in headmasters, or in highly ornamental pots. No, delightful as the pastime of measuring may be, it is the most futile of all occupations, and to submit to the decrees of the measurers, the most servile of attitudes. It may seem a brutal thing to say, and it is a sad thing to say, but as a matter of hard fact, the theory that political genius bloweth where it listeth, and equally in poor and rich, holds little truth. As a matter of hard fact, 9 out of those 12, quote, great poetical names of the last 100 years, unquote, were university men, which means that somehow or other they procured the means to get the best education England can give. As a matter of hard fact, of the remaining 3, you know that Browning was well-to-do, and I challenge you that if he had not been well-to-do, he would no more have attained to write Saul, or the Ring of the Book, than Ruskin would have attained to writing modern painters, if his father had not dealt prosperously in business. Rossetti had a small private income and, moreover, he painted. There remains but Keats, whom Atropos slew young, as she slew John Clare in a madhouse, and James Thompson by the laudanum he took to drug disappointment. These are dreadful facts, but let us face them. It is, however, dishonouring to us as a nation, certainly that by some fault of our commonwealth, the poor poet has not in these days, nor has had for 200 years, a dog's chance. Believe me, and I have spent a great part of 10 years in watching some 320 elementary schools, we may prate of democracy, but actually, a poor child in England has little more hope than had the son of an Athenian slave to be emancipated into that intellectual freedom of which great writings are born. I told you in the course of this paper that Shakespeare had a sister. Do not look for her in Sir Sidney Lee's Life of the Poet. She died young. Alas, she never wrote a word. She lies buried where the omnibuses now stop, opposite the Elephant and Castle. Now my belief is that the poet who never wrote a word and was buried at the crossroads still lives. She lives in you and in me, and in many other women who are not here tonight, for they are washing up the dishes and putting the children to bed. But she lives, for great poets do not die. They are continuing presences. They need only the opportunity to walk among us in the flesh. This opportunity, as I think, it is now coming within your power to give her. For my belief is that if we live another century or so, I am talking of the common life, which is the real life, and not of the little separate lives which we live as individuals, we have 500 a year each of us, and rooms of our own. if we have the habit of freedom and the courage to write exactly what we think, if we escape a little from the common sitting room and see human beings not always in their relation to each other, but in relation to reality, and the sky too, and the trees, and whatever it may be in themselves, if we look past Milton's bogey, for no human being should shut out the view, if we face the fact, for it is a fact, that there is no arm to cling to, but that we go alone and that our relation is to the world of reality and not only to the world of men and women, then the opportunity will come and the dead poet who was Shakespeare's sister will put on the body which she has so often laid down. Drawing her life from the lives of the unknown who were her forerunners, as her brother did before her, she will be born. And for her coming without that preparation, without that effect on our part, without that determination that when she is born again she shall find it possible to live and write her poetry, that we cannot expect, for that would be impossible. But I maintain that she would come if we worked for her, and that so to work, even in poverty and obscurity, is worthwhile.
You have been listening to Subtext Adata AiR series, Knowledge Production with an American Accent. From myself, Anna Kostreva. Recorded in June 2018 in conversation with Gabriel Birch and Alex Head, supported by the European Capital of Culture, Plovdiv, 2019. With samples from Chris Marker, One Day in the Life of Andrei Arsenovich, 1999. I Know You Are, But What Am I, from Mogwai. Change My Mind, by Andres. Freesound.org. A young woman playing the guitar on the streets of Plovdiv, near Adata. The Vlog, Way Away. Uri Hansen's TED Talk, This Is Your Brain on Communication. And music from Tim Lang. Thank you for listening. Tune in for next week's final episode in the series with Nathan Gray.